from Abuja.
Hello, I'm Magnus Kpakol, and we're glad you're part of Magnus Kpakol GVA to help raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. In View today, we look at morality, leadership, and underdevelopment. Are there connections? We have got an eminent Nigerian diasporan to help us with this. Stay tuned to this one because we've got the renowned Dr. Charles Ndifon with us. Dr. Ndifon is based in the United States and has spoken on the matter all over the world. But before that, in our hidden economics, the economics in the things we do to escape poverty. Now up next in our quick view, we rank countries by Human Development Index. That's coming right up. The Human Development Index, HDI, uses life expectancy, education, and per capita income indicators to construct a composite statistic used to rank countries into 4 tiers of human development. The HDI helps us to recognize whether an economy is advanced or underdeveloped. A country scores a higher Human Development Index, or HDI, when the lifespan is higher, the education level is higher, and the GDP per capita is also higher. The general purpose of the HDI is to help nations and policymakers shift the focus of economic welfare from using national income accounting to using people-centered policies for life expectancy, education, and income growth. In this connection, which of the following G20 countries is not among the top 20 in the world in HDI ranking? Australia, France, Japan, and South Korea. Which of the following African countries is not in the lowest group in the world in ranking HDI? Angola, Namibia, Nigeria, and Tanzania. Stay with us for our answers coming up shortly. Still in view, morality, leadership, and underdevelopment with Dr. Charles Ndifon.
One year I'll be back, I promise you.
1 year is too long.
See, it's abroad though. Let me just go. I promise you I'll be back. 1 year.
Promise.
I promise you. You know I love you.
I love you too. But 1 year.
Ah! You again!
Today, not today. And when I finish, you go no say na me, as you did the delay. To prove my loving, you must chop my money, Cause my bank alerts na bagam, my checking on the bounce, my mansion on a badam. Baby, take a look around. My bank alerts na bagam, my checking on the bounce, my mansion on a badam. Make you take a look around. Girl, it's up to you, but I dey pray you say I do. Go tell your papa, say na me.
Bank alert by the great brothers duo P Square. Cause my bank alert na gbagam, my check e no dey bounce. When poverty denies you a gbagam bank alert, you would dance like crazy if the marriage of your daughter liberates you from income misery. Senator Marco Rubio gave a speech on the 50th anniversary of the U.S. War on Poverty by President Lyndon B. Johnson. In the speech, Senator Rubio stated that when the War on Poverty campaign started, 93% of children born in the United States were born to married parents. But that by 2010, that number had plummeted to 60%. Rubio stated that marriage is the greatest tool to lift children and families from poverty. So, is Senator Rubio really correct? So if two very poor people get married to each other, will their poverty end? I believe that marriage is a good thing and that it leads to family stability and therefore helps to anchor better economic conditions for the children of the poor. But as I have always argued, attempts should always be made by society and policymakers to help poor people help themselves. Some researchers think that marriage, or a lack thereof, is not the real problem facing poor parents. Being poor is the real problem. Indeed, Crystal Williams of Ohio State University has concluded that having a lasting and successful marriage is not a cure for living in poverty. For poor people to get out of poverty, there must be an evacuation mechanism. It is often very difficult for poor people who are trapped in misery to design and operate such a mechanism. So when a genuine opportunity comes, the poor will have to take advantage of it. However, and unfortunately, sometimes short-sightedness from income poverty can cause the poor to make terrible choices in which they get gravely taken advantage of. And therefore, if an honest marriage based on love pops up, a poor family should grab it quickly. Love is true and sacrificial. Even The Economist places a high psychic value on love. So if you can be sure of the love, take the marriage that pulls you out of poverty. It tends to build a permanent barrier against the malady. Our hidden economics for you.
My mansion on Abadam, baby, take a look around. My bank alert na bagam, my checking on the bounce. My mansion on Abadam, make you take a look around. Aye, aye, aye. Girl, it's up to you, I still the pray you say I do. Aye, go tell your papa say, I made it come for you. Yeah, go, go. Yeah, go, go.
Before we start our discussion, here are our quick view answers. Rated at number 21, France is the G20 country not in the top 20 in the world in the United Nations Human Development Index ranking. Namibia is the African country listed here, not in the Low Human Development Index group. Most African countries rank in the Low and Medium Human Development Index groups, with none in the Very High Human Development Index group. Only Seychelles and Mauritius rank in the High Human Development Index group among African countries. For comments, adverts, and sponsorship, please see our information displayed on the screen. Africa needs to escape poverty and underdevelopment. But to do that, Africa must strive to understand the real causes of the maladies. Is there a link connecting underdevelopment with morality and leadership? What is morality? What is good leadership? To answer these questions, we have with us Dr. Charles Ndifon. Dr. Ndifon has a ministry spanning over a quarter of a century As an apostle, he has impacted over 70 nations with the gospel of Jesus Christ. He's also a well-known, widely respected business strategist and consultant to major corporations around the globe. He has been sought after as an advisor to kings, presidents, prime ministers, and government leaders around the world. Please join us in our discussion with Dr. Charles Ndifon. All right, thank you, Dr. Ndifon. Happy to have you in our studios, our Magodi studios.
That's right.
Now, this is your first time on my show. We're glad that you were able to spare some time to come see us here in our studios.
Thank you.
Now, today, what we're looking at, if you look at the Human Development Index, you find that it's mostly African countries. When you're looking at the bottom of the scale, it's mostly African countries that rank there. Probably the bottom 20 countries are like mostly, perhaps with the exception of countries like Yemen or
Haiti,
Afghanistan,
yes,
or perhaps Haiti.
yes,
Mostly African countries.
Yes.
And then if you look at other scores, if you look at electricity provision, Africa also ranks very low. That's why they call the continent a dark continent. So the question is, in terms of development, why are we so underdeveloped? Does it have any connection with leadership and with morality or anything like that?
First of all, we have to define what morality is,
yes,
and what leadership is, and
yes,
then we put that together. One of the things you find that morality is the standard by which we define right and wrong. And one of the other things you find out, it comes from either yourself, from the family, sometimes from the community, or from religion, from the government, or other entities that make this up, and that influences how the thought process of the people normally is. So when you understand that, and you understand who's leading in that, and how they come to decisions that actually moves the community forward, then you begin to talk about leadership and morality. Now, why Africa is in certain ways in that direction is because everything rises and falls on leadership. So anything that is wrong with a place, you just look at the leader, because it becomes an expression of his leadership or her leadership.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about morality and moral judgment, I think for most part it has to do with what values do these leaders hold dear, that is influencing the destiny of the people. So it actually has to do with what views have shaped their actions. So I agree with you that it has something to do with that. But not only that, is whether they have the will to explore other alternatives also. Because one thing about morality is if it's derived from the society, from the country, then as the country changes, the moral values would also change. So depending on what direction the change is progressing, it determines what direction the economic and socioeconomic condition of people goes to.
So now that you got over 54 or so different countries in Africa. How could it be? How could it be so coincidental that almost every single one of them is underdeveloped? Of course, if we take the exception of South Africa and maybe go to North Africa and look at some of the Northern African countries. But in the middle, right there, most of the countries are underdeveloped. How did it so happen that we have poor leadership amongst these countries?
I guess some of it is influences and mindsets. You know, some of the leaders are in an echo chamber. You know, basically they echo each other's thoughts. Basically, group thinking. They hang around similar people. You've got to step away from the mindset of what's not working. Take example, Rwanda. When I was invited by Kagame to go there in 2011, it was a big surprise to me. When you talk about Rwanda, you think about genocide. But Rwanda is still a totally different country.
Sure.
By 2013, every child in the country owned a laptop. Every community in Rwanda, this is Africa, in the middle of Africa, every community in Rwanda has free Wi-Fi. This is Rwanda 1994 genocide. What was the difference? The people came together after the atrocities, and they forgave each other. The truth and reconciliation happened. They confronted the situation, and then they forgave each other, and they said, "This is one Rwanda." And when I was there in 2011, the pulse was their goal for 2015. Everybody spoke the same language. There was unity amongst the people. You couldn't tell the Tutsis from the Hutus. Everybody was on the same. So that's an example of leadership in the midst of leadership failure.
Right.
But what accounts for that? The will to lead differently. Because in Africa, sometimes people get comfortable when they're in leadership and everybody acquiesces to them.
Yes.
Partly is because they want to gain or get some favors from some of those people. So my take on that is, why is it kind of common in Africa? Partly is because no one actually challenges those that are in leadership fiercely enough to change the narrative of what's happening. It doesn't have to be. Isn't it amazing that Africans, when they go abroad, they do so well? When they fit into a different system. Could it be that it's the system in which we find ourselves? Exactly. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to come and change the system. We don't change the system, get rid of it.
So, like a good thing you talked about Rwanda. When you look at the same Human Development Index scale we're talking about, Rwanda actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, ranks the highest.
That's right.
Amongst African countries.
That's
on
right.
That scale. So, but how did we get Paul Kagame? Was it by luck? Because he comes from the stock.
That's right.
Because oftentimes I say, okay, if you bring me a leader, I'm going to look at the stock from which that leader came. And the leader is probably going to reflect that stock. So what's the difference?
So you can come from the ghetto, but doesn't mean the ghetto has to stay with you. It's called exposure.
What will wash the ghetto away from you?
The first thing is exposure. If you want to change a person, change their thinking. What are they exposed to? Who is influencing them? Those are the things you want to think about. What is the passion of their heart? Those are the things. You find a young man, for example, in the ghetto, grew up with all this killing and drugs and everything, and still makes it. That the Sergeant Carson, Ben Carson, he came through all of those things with all the bad things and became one of the best sergeants in the world. What accounted for that? Partly is your background. In the midst of those things, they are still good leaders, but they're never given the opportunity to lead because of vested interest in different sectors. That's really the problem. So most of what we see as a problem are so ingrained in the system that you're trying to change the system and the system actually sucks you in and spits you out. So if we are going to do anything different in Africa, we need a rude awakening in Africa. We have to get rid of whole generation.
How do we do that?
First of all, the electorates have to be a little more educated in how they vote.
But but that's the problem. How do you get them to be educated? Because they are in the system already. They come through the ranks. They come through as local government chairman. They have become senator. They become governor. There's a whole host of them. They control the system. So who comes from outside to make changes?
Well, this is the key. A lot of times I hear the people in Nigeria say, "Oh, we just like the American system." They're not. The American system is set up that the very powerful do not rule everything. The power actually comes from the people. For example, you can win the popular vote and still not become president. What does that mean?
As we just saw.
Exactly. The idea is the smaller states have a say. Everybody has some say. You cannot just keep it to the East Coast or the West Coast to decide who's president. In other words, you have more of a representative democracy. You have the electoral college where they actually vote. And you don't really vote. It's based on who wins in those small areas. So they say in America, all politics is local. But in Nigeria, all politics is national. What's the difference? In Nigeria, from the national coffers, you spread the money out. In the United States, everything is raised locally. So if you're not a local person, you really don't have much of a say in the local area. So even if money is coming from other places, the local people know how to control the narrative for their local election, and they're actually really represented in the national body. So some of it is there has to be some systemic changes in how things are, even in the Constitution.
The problem is how to get them to happen. I know that you're well traveled, and in fact, you've been invited to address parliaments. Can the relatively slow pace of economic growth and underdevelopment of the African continent, compared to Asian countries, be traced to any degradation and even loss of African values and perhaps morals? Nowadays, people speak of poor governance when they want to discuss corruption. The fact of the matter is that a fast pace of development cannot occur anywhere if good governance is absent. Now, who drives good governance? To me, good governance is not a thing that simply arises from having a good leader. Good governance is a product of the people. It is then demanded by the people. A leader, good or bad, comes from the population stock. In a true democracy, the people demand and achieve good leadership through the ballot box. When free and fair elections take place, the people would have produced their own leader and receive whatever they voted for and expected. If the leadership in such a situation is bad, then, in theory, the people were unable to find a good person from amongst themselves. In such a situation, it would behoove them to go back to the drawing board and find out why their society has produced, as it were, an unacceptable leader. The people of any society want a good quality of life and therefore the pursuit of happiness. If the quality of life in any society is not rapidly improving compared to similar societies, then a fundamental failure of leadership selection is taking place. It is not possible to excise good moral standing and character from good leadership. Without good leadership, no developing country can easily escape the trap of underdevelopment. Today, African countries populate the lower rungs of the ladder when using just about any economic indicator to measure underdevelopment. Indeed, sadly, of the bottom 30 countries ranked on the Human Development Index scale of the United Nations, more than 20 are African nations. Folks, however they emerged, African leaders must stand up now. They cannot continue to permit a situation where Africa has to be used to represent a pitiful people. Africa cannot continue to dramatize a shameful condition for the world to see. Africa cannot permit this when it is so well endowed. It is left to us to do something. I'm Magnus Kpakol, and that's my view.